Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Occult Perspectives. So, I'm going to be picking up directly from where I left off in the last video. My phone cut out, said that I didn't have any more space, but I think what I had to do was back up all of my photos and all of that stuff to the iCloud because I just paid for a 99-cent a month upgrade. So, I have more space on my phone. So, I guess it needed to do that in order to make more space. I'm not sure exactly what happened. Um, but anyway, so I took a little short break. I'm going to be jumping right back in to where I left off in the last video, and I'm going to go for as long as I can. It probably won't be too long of a video. Try to go maybe 30 minutes or so, because I need to go get some food today. I've just been kind of hanging around the house and cleaning up and tidying, so let's get back to it. We're on page 15 in the Citra Acra grimoire. In order to erect the manifestation of its thoughts, the retracted side became as a light. The Ein Sof Or, called the limitless light, but being in actuality Ein's limited light. So even though it's called limitless light, this Ein Sof Or, it's just limited, it's Ein's limited light, and projected itself as a ray of thoughtful light into that void that we were talking about earlier. And to the Tahiru void, it had caused between its now fully opposing side. So the Ein Sof was opposed in and of itself and had two halves, which created this void. And the Ein Sof projects this limitless light, quote, limitless light, which is in fact Ein's limited light, projected itself as a ray of thoughtful light into that void it had caused between its now fully opposing side, this in order to realize the forms and structures of its cosmos by uttering the earlier, before only thought, letters, and names wherever inside of the void that its light would reach, in order to establish and fill its vessel forms of creation. So that sentence was a little confusing to me even when I read it the first time, and still kind of is. I'll read it again. So this Ein Sof, it produced a ray into the void it had caused between its now fully opposing side. This in order to realize the forms that it's manifesting. Remember, it's projecting, it's creating forms, it's creating objective reality to further know itself. This in order to realize the forms and structures of its cosmos by uttering the earlier, before only thought, letters, and names wherever inside of the void that its light would reach in order to establish and fill its vessel forms of creation. So take that passage however you will. Now we're on page 16. The thoughtless, quote, light. We already talked about ultraviolet light being like higher frequencies of light, which made a different opposing light, gave way to the abyss, what we know as the abyss. The thoughtless side, now fully awakened from its state of self-contemplation, established its own shining forth. So this is the side that's looking to uphold the Ein, counteracting the light of creation and limiting the void place into which the thoughtful light could shine in. So it's starting to limit this void. Thus, the light of creation could only afflict the upper half of the void space created by its contraction. So a void's created in the first place, and then there's a split within this void in the upper half of the void. Thus, the light of creation could only afflict the upper half of the void space created by its contraction, and the thoughtless light remained in its lower half. So you've got the upper half with the thoughtful light, and now the lower half. The thoughtless light, which seeks to go back to Ein, is in the lower half. Remained in its lower half that had become as the depths of a great abyss. Paragraph 2 seems like there may be some reference to Da'at here. Let's go ahead and read that. In a point in the Tahiru where the thoughtful, remember Tahiru means void, in a point in the Tahiru where the thoughtful and thoughtless light collided. So within this void where the thoughtful and the thoughtless light collided at the place of liminal limit that had been established between the two sides. So there's just further like breaking down, and like it's kind of a mess at this point. In a point in the Tahiru where the thoughtful and thoughtless light collided at the place of liminal limit that had been established between the two sides, fragmented traces of the two lights that had been separated engulfed each other. So fragments engulfing each other like sparks from two opposing fires, and a gate in between the two sides took form, perhaps Da'at, the 11, the gate, the pillars. A gate in between the two sides took form, creating an unwanted bondage between them. So now these two sides have an unwanted connection, an unwanted bondage. One side imprisoning the sparks of black light, and the other side binding and absorbing aspects of the white. So we'll call this black light the original light, for lack of a better term, and then this white light is like the furthering of this original source, trying to understand itself, but limiting itself in the process. Put on some more sounds, tones, just to have a little background sound. Some abundance tones this time. As we're talking about everything retracting back into the Ein. But something I've been working with a lot lately on a conscious and mental level is really being more open to abundance, not being in a poverty mindset, learning to not be like against money, even though we know how corrupt, everything is, and that money doesn't really necessarily equal merit. It does equal energy, but it doesn't really equal merit. Money goes towards the most dumb things. A lot of the time it's all this wasted manifestation, when it really could be poured into better uses, of course. But we still need to teach our minds to be open and receptive to money, abundance. So I've been trying to work on that and not be against money. Get into the mindset, I attract money. I constantly attract money into my life. It's just like a magnet. It finds its way to me, even if I'm not looking for it. I'm manifesting money, trying to get into that space. That way, it creates more freedom for the self. There's a lot of empowerment in being able to manifest wealth and money and abundance. It helps you create the world you want. So as a magician or anybody who's on the spiritual path, don't be ashamed of wanting money. Like, this whole idea of money being evil and stuff, that's like people who are like against money on that level, they're not really spiritual people, because the best spiritual people usually have decent amounts of money, because they're putting their, occult understandings and practices into a practical, form, they're using it in a practical way to manifest what they need. So we're going to move on in this document. Here we get into the tree. We finally get into the tree of life formation and the YHVH, which we know is the Yod-He Vav-He, which we work with a lot in ceremonial magic, especially like the LIRP and the LBRP. That's why this document's so interesting, because you're going to get a totally different viewpoint on the Yod-He Vav-He. What is Yod-He Vav-He? It's the Hebrew letters, Yod-He Vav-He. It's divine masculinity, divine feminine, physical masculine, and physical feminine, all four in one. So it's like a unifying name of God, which represents the unification of all those four archetypes I just talked about. We also see that with certain symbology in like the tarot and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into that right now. But in a point in the Tahiru, this void space where the thoughtful and thoughtless light collided. Oh, I'm sorry, I already read that paragraph. Moving to the next paragraph. The thoughtful light set out to establish via its emanations its 10 Sephiroth. So here we go. Now is the formation of the tree of life. The thoughtful light set out to establish via its emanations its 10 Sephiroth upon the tree of life, that it thought and envisioned to erect and crown with its own singular essence, remaining at the most elevated point after its planned diluting condensation. So we're getting a little scientific with the terms there, a little more alchemical. Its 10 Sephiroth upon the tree of life that it thought and envisioned to erect and crown with its own singular essence. So it's crowning itself with its own essence rather than the Ein, the essence of the Ein, which is the totality. And crown with its own singular essence, remaining at the most elevated point after its planned diluting condensation. As YHVH, the Tetragrammaton, he would limit, know, and make known himself without recognizing the divine nothing before his fall of separation. So it's not, this Yod-He-Vav-He is not recognizing the Ein, in a sense, is what it's saying here, which is very interesting. The thoughtless light opposes the, quote, sin of restriction. Wanting to go back into its Ein, it all comes back to that. Without the barriers of void space and within, the sparks imprisoned within Yod-He-Vav-He rebelled. So we're going to read about that in the next paragraph. But his creating, this YHVH, would not be met without the opposition of the thoughtless light against the sin of restriction, there it is, via the limiting, forming, and ordering of the unmanifest essence. This opposition was not only instigated from without the barriers of the void of the Tahiru, but also from within the very structures of the Sephirothic tree itself. For those sparks of the black light that were imprisoned within the realm of Yod-He-Vav-He did not succumb to the restrictive causality of his rule and ordering thoughts, but did instead rebel over and over again. So you have these sparks from that original black light that are trapped within this realm, and they're rebelling over and over and over again. There's always going to be this push back from this thoughtless light, now that the thoughtful light is trying to manifest itself. Moving on to page 17. So with this imprisoned black light, there ends up being 3 rebellions that take place. Let's get into that. Thrice did they primarily rebel in such a way that a wound-like hole was caused upon the tree of creation during its process of germination. Wondering if also that has something to do with the Da'at. But I think it gets into Da'at a little bit later on in this document. The first revolt, so this first rebellion, became initiated by an uprising of the light alien to creation, within that which was meant to become the 4th emanated Sephirah, belonging to Masukiel, the dividing screen of God. So there's some correlation, must be some correlation between this Masukiel, Masukhiel, and Hesed, because as we know, Hesed is usually the 4th Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, unless this is counting Da'at, which would be the 4th one down. You'd have Kether, Hokmah, Bina, and then Da'at, but that's on the Tree of Life after the fall, with Malkut included, so I'm not exactly sure here. The first revolt became initiated by an uprising of the light alien to creation, within that which was meant to become the 4th emanated Sephirah. So a light which is alien to the creation, I'm assuming they mean the creation of the thoughtful light. Within this 4th emanated Sephirah, which would later not be, so it's later going to not exist, the sparks of the black light remaining within the Tahiru space that the thoughtful light now sought to fill up fully. So the thoughtful light's trying to fully take out and fill up this void the void space. Remaining within the Tahiru space that the thoughtful light now sought to fill up fully, took forms and images most hostile against the will of the creator of this, the creator of thought, forms essentially, which is dividing the Ein further. So we'll call it like a false creator. The name of the ruler of this revolting emanation and the prince of all its warriors, all possessed by that other light, was Kemetiel. It almost reminds me of like an Aztec name. Quetzalcoatl. It's like giving me that kind of, that vibe, that same vibe, but it's Qemetiel.